Tourette's podcast is not a medical advice show. It's a show about experiences. In the course of that, we may talk about medications or therapies or stories from the doctor's office, but don't mistake any of that for medical advice or direction. It's not. Get that only from people or places licensed or certified to give it. Not from a massively fun and action-packed podcast about our life experiences. Such as
7-8 years ago, where it occurred to me, like, well, why don't I try to do like drawing for a living? That would be incredible. Then I could do something I love that helps my Tourette's. I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner.
This is Tourette's podcast, made possible with support of the Tourette Association of America and part of the Geeks Rising Network.
Please leave your message after the tone.
Hi, my name's Becky. I'm from London, although I don't currently live in London. I live in Dorset now. I'm a barber. I've missed listening to the podcast so much, but I do play some episodes of the ones I've previously not listened to. I usually play it in the shop, so my customers actually are quite interested. They do ask lots of questions. Anyway, I just thought I'd say hi.
Hi, I'm Laura from Brazil, and I just want to say that I have been learning a lot with the podcast and all the people that are part of it. And so thank you for sharing your experience, and thanks, Ben, for being kind with me. Bye.
Did you know that Tourette's podcast is Elizabeth's favorite podcast?
So something cool that I've gained from having Tourette Syndrome is the ability to advocate for myself and for others. Throughout this pandemic, it's actually been really neat because I've been able to use those skills that I've gained to help others and advocate for others and do my very best to be a decent human being and help out people that are maybe struggling to get the help that they need. And I'm curious what other people out there are doing to support their community and family and friends and how everybody's feeling about it and how they're dealing with it. And if they find that having Tourette Syndrome and living with Tourette Syndrome and the skills or habits or anything like that really that they've kind of gained from having Tourette Syndrome, how they might be helping themselves and or others within their community through this terrible time.
Hi, I've been out working in the yard and it's a beautiful sunshiny day. I have a goose that is now coming up to the edge of my shoes to eat the cracked corn I'm throwing out for it. And to top it all off, I just found a stick that the end of it looks like it's wearing a cowboy boot.
Woo, 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 woo. Sometimes Tourette Syndrome can make you feel blue, ticking out loud, not sure just what to do. You're getting stares. People think they care, but they're scratching their own curiosity. Will my heart repair? But having TS can be a blast. When you meet each other, someone understands you at last. Who cares if it makes you feel like an outcast? I love the community, that's why I listen to the TS podcast. I listen to the Tourette podcast. I listen to the Tourette podcast.
Y'all, thank you so much. Every voice memo I get here makes my day, and I can't wait to share it on the podcast. Particularly, if you write a song like Hera did, Hera, thank you so much. That was amazing. You're in the Tourette's Podcast Hall of Fame now for having written a song that captures everything here perfectly. Gigantic thanks. I love that. It's such a cool way to open season 5. And thanks to Rebecca Laura, Elizabeth, Jade, and Trish for sending in their thoughts. If you want to send in a voice memo or an audio file for me to play in the podcast, please do. You can email it to tourettespodcast@gmail.com and put the words audio message in the subject line. Thanks. And we also have a new logo designed by the amazing Elizabeth McDonald, who did our portrait sketch giveaway last season to 2 lucky winners. Turned out awesomely well. Check out Elizabeth on Instagram. I'll spell the handle. It's at PEYERATE. That's Elizabeth McDonald on Instagram, one of my favorite artists with Tourette Syndrome. We're going to be talking with another one of my favorite artists on this episode, Rossignol, who I was extremely excited to talk with. And he's also been doing some cool stuff to help fight hunger amid the COVID-19 impacts. We'll get to that. Real quick, this is, of course, the first episode of Season 5. It's amazing we're at the 5th season, made possible with support from the Tourette Association of America, online at tourette.org. And so going back to COVID-19, we all know the impacts that it's had so far. First off, I hope everybody's taking the precautions, taking this seriously. But even then, I'm wishing the best health to everybody no matter what. It's definitely an anxious time. It's hard to feel good about it. But we're doing what we can, and we keep the communication going, keep doing cool things for each other, and keep finding ways to stay mentally healthy, too. Like, that's a big deal as we all kind of hole up in our homes and kind of limit our lifestyles. Big events around the world have had to have been canceled, including a big one that a lot of us were looking forward to, and that's the Tourette Association of America's annual conference that was supposed to be coming up in May. For obvious reasons we can all support, they had to cancel, but they've done something in its place that's even more accessible. The Tourette Association of America's inaugural virtual conference will be hosted May 15th and 16th, 2020. The virtual conference will provide a forum for the Tourette syndrome and tic disorder community to learn and engage with each other throughout a variety of web-based sessions. Information being presented is geared toward adults, parents, teens, educators, and medical professionals in the TS community. Check out the schedule of events at touretteconference.org for all sessions being offered and register for the sessions you're interested in attending. The 2020 virtual conference is being offered free of charge, thanks to generous donors and sponsors alike. If you're interested in making a donation to help further TS programming, again, head to touretteconference.org and click the appropriate link. They'll have yoga, a class called Adulting 101, Resiliency with Tourette, a research symposium, navigating cultural challenges, the present and future of therapeutics for TS, and a lot more. I think this is a great way to make the best of the situation. A virtual conference, May 15th and 16th, with really great programming, free. touretteconference.org. And while I'm at it, speaking of COVID-19 and the extra level of concern on the Tourette community and the anxiety that we deal with, not only that, but I've heard from a lot of people who've developed tics that directly relate to the coronavirus. So people with tic disorders or Tourette syndrome with more coughing tics and more tics where you touch your face and just things you're, not supposed to be at least seen doing out in public. A lot of people talking about this. And if you go to the Tourette Association of America's website right now, tourette.org, you'll find resources to help out. You can also print out a Tourette ID card, the one that says, "Why do I act this way?" to explain to people why you might be coughing. If it's a coughing tic, for instance, because in that case, it's not coronavirus, it's Tourette syndrome. A Tourette ID card can help explain that. Tourette.org and click on the COVID-19 link. So you're listening to episode 1 right now of season 5. At the same time, I released episode 0, as we always do each season. And there's some heavy stuff in it, talking about mental health and experiences that I've had recently that I wanted to walk you through and just sort of open up wide about my recent stay at a hospital as an inpatient. It was enormously helpful to me. It's a good 40 minutes of talking about it, so I'll save that for episode 0. And you can find it in the same place you found this episode. If you've subscribed, then it's already waiting on you in your podcast player. It's really neat seeing how the coronavirus, for all the awful stuff going on, it's neat seeing how creative people have been in support of one another, in support of the greater world, supporting healthcare workers, essential charities. Our guest this week is a renowned artist. His name is Rossignol, and Tourette syndrome is a big part of his connection to art and his position as a professional artist who makes his living off of art. So he recently did some work for Tyler, the Creator, a well-known rapper and producer, and for the past little bit, Rossignol has been selling pages from his sketchbook to donate proceeds to fight hunger. I bought one of his sketches, so I got this one-of-a-kind Rossignol piece of art framed and hanging in my house right now. And so I got to support him and a food nonprofit at the same time. If you're not familiar with his work, check out his Instagram. I'll spell his name for you. It's Lewis, Lewis, Rossignol, Rossignol. Look that up on Instagram and you'll see a really fantastic approach to sketch art with other media mixed into it, like old photographs and things like that. There's a sense of chaos and improvisation to his artwork that I asked him about, but there's also an exactitude to it. Like, he draws portraits of notable people like Anthony Bourdain, Nick Cave, interesting people like that, and there's no mistaking who you're looking at. He just has a really wonderful sense of communication with his work, and again, the core of his interest in art goes back to his life with Tourette Syndrome. So we'll get right to it. This is us getting to know Louis Rossignol. Just for the record, could you give us your name and the general part of the world that you hail from, and what you do with your life, or however you would introduce yourself to this audience?
Yeah, so my name is Louis Rossignol. I'm an illustrator and artist. I live in Maine, in South Portland, Maine. So it's probably one of the bigger cities in Maine. If you've heard of any city in Maine, it's likely to be Bangor or Portland. And I've been doing I've always loved drawing and doing creative things, but for the past 4 or 5 years now, I've been doing it professionally, and I just love doing it. And Tourette's is actually one of the reasons that I love to draw so much, because of the fact that it's like one of the only things that's ever helped my Tourette's is drawing.
Man, it's so amazing that you're able to do it professionally too. I mean, if it's something that's a practical help in your life. And the first thing I want to say too is your art is absolutely amazing. It's so good, and you have a massive following online, and you deserve it. Not to dump all of this on you as soon as you walk in, but it's the kind of art I love because you can spend time looking at it and find new things that pop out, new details, little things that you've hidden in there. But right now you're selling actual pages from your sketchbook, and you're donating proceeds to charity so people don't go hungry during the pandemic. I just bought one. I mean, major props to you for doing that. How's that going?
It's been amazing. So I just started it yesterday. I generally sell my work for a decent amount of money, but I thought I've got so many sketchbooks that I've filled that are just sitting here, and so I decided I'm going to throw up the pages, just a random page for $75, and you don't get to choose the drawing. It's just like a grab bag type thing, and it's kind of like in my mind, it was like a win-win-win, because as an artist, this is a slow time for me. We're in the middle of like a pandemic, and everyone's business that's non-essential is kind of slowed down. Not a lot of people are buying art right now.
Yeah.
And so I was like, how can I get a little bit more income, but also help other people? And so I decided to do this, and then half of the money will go right towards feeding. So it's going to Feed America, which helps with all sorts of local food pantries all over the United States. And then half the money is going to be to help supplement my income. So it's altruistic, but it's also to help myself too. And I'm hoping it also is a nice way to give people that like my work an original piece for a really good price. And so that's why I think it's a win-win-win.
Yeah, it was. I think I paid $75, and that's kind of nice because that's accessible for a one of a kind piece that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's not a print that came out of a printer or anything. It's something that it came from your hand. There's money that goes to you, but it's not so accessible that it's a small amount going to the hunger charity. It's a really cool thing you're doing that people can kind of access and have a one of a kind piece and also help in the process.
I just thought about it yesterday. I started it about 24 hours ago, and it's already raised over $1,500 for the food pantry. So,
that's so cool.
Yeah. So basically about $35 for every order goes right to the food pantry, right? Because it's like $75. Take out the $5 for the shipping stuff. Half goes to the food pantry. So $1,500 already in one day. I hope that really helps out, because I know that they're doing a lot of good, and there's a lot of people that they're already living paycheck to paycheck, and when you're all of a sudden you have to go maybe months without a paycheck, but at least a couple of weeks, that's going to be hard for a lot of people.
It's really horrible what's going on right now. And the creative community has been, the hospitality community has been hit really hard. The creative community has been hit really hard. But I really like seeing that those two sectors specifically are being really creative with kind of coming up with good solutions that are able to kind of help everybody at once. It's really heartening to see. You're also incorporating other kinds of media into your art as well. Like there's some collage aspects to it, or it kind of looks that way. How do you begin a piece? And I asked this because there's kind of a chaotic flow to it that doesn't look planned out. Like, do you know what you're about to draw or sketch before you begin, or does it take shape as you do it?
It depends on the piece. Like I do a lot of commission work for people. Like they'll hire me to do a portrait of somebody. And so those pieces are way more planned out.
Yeah.
But if I'm just drawing for like, just in my sketchbook, which is a lot of the time, it's very spontaneous, and I'll just start drawing, and then I kind of usually start with a pen, and then get to the point where I want to start bringing in other mediums, and I have like boxes at my house filled with old photographs and things, so I use a lot of collage elements in my work. But that usually comes like after the drawing starts to take form. But yeah, my process is very spontaneous.
So art is a big part of the TS community, and it's obviously there's that intersection you've already named. It's a helpful expression for you. But with art being such a big part of the TS community, and that includes music and writing, anything expressive like that, for me, it definitely picked up when I became more aware of my tics and other aspects of my life that didn't seem normal or didn't seem like anything I could control on my own. Did you consciously get into art, or is it something that you just kind of realized was a part of you that you couldn't turn off?
I always loved, even from when I was a kid, I always loved drawing. I remember taking all the elective art classes I could through junior high and high school. And so it wasn't until like later on, I don't even know, maybe later teen years, when I think my mother was the first one that noticed, like, when I was drawing, I wasn't I didn't have tics. And so but it didn't even occur to me until just about 6 or 7 years ago. I'm 40 now. So when I got out of school, I did a lot of waiting tables and jobs I hated.
Yeah.
And then, so it was like, 7-8 years ago where it occurred to me, like, well, why don't I try to do like drawing for a living? That would be incredible. Then I could do something I love that helps my Tourette's. And, but it was just like, I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner. And so I went back to school to learn, because I love drawing, but I didn't think maybe I was skilled enough to start a career. So I thought I had to learn more. And I went to school, and I do have an illustration degree. Yeah, no, it's not like a doctor suggested, you should try drawing, that might help your tics. Right. It would just happened. In fact, I remember just being so frustrated because it seemed like there was nothing that would help. Like, you go to the doctor and they say like, oh, well, you have tics, and there's really nothing. There's not really any medications that help that well. I mean, I did try some medications when I was younger, but nothing really helped. And it's frustrating when you get like a diagnosis that's basically not curable.
Yeah. And
so to find something that actually helps, I always recommend to people, if they have Tourette's, like, try something creative, drawing or anything creative. I bet you'll find that it'll be helpful and therapeutic.
There's like a sense of confidence you can gain from, I guess thinking, I was definitely heavily into art when I was younger, and I still am from different angles, visual mediums like photography and music as well. When you create something that you're satisfied with, it's such a huge confidence boost, and it kind of gets you going on the next one, because it's almost like, forgive the metaphor, but it's kind of like a high where you make something that you're really satisfied with that is really hard to replicate in any other aspect of your life. Like, for example, I was horrible academically. I was terrible at school, not a good test taker. But when it came to creative classes, that's sort of where I did well. That was my thing. But that's not really the forefront of education in the U.S. There's
not
math
at all.
and science and all of that, which I was just absolutely awful at. And, that affects confidence. And when people are noticing things about you that seem like, easy pickings to make fun of, it's just, I definitely spent a lot of time alone when I was a kid. And that was the time where I was able to kind of dig up these creative expressions that did have a positive impact. And my parents were really supportive with that. And, I could call my own shots, I guess. It was something that I could control. And well, I guess going back, how early was it where tics kind of developed with you? Or so you're 40, I'm the same age. As we speak, I'll be 40 in 2 months. And at the time, there wasn't preloaded knowledge about TS within families. What did they think it was? Like, how was that regarded?
Yeah, so when I don't know the exact age, but I think I was probably around 10, maybe 11. I started having, my parents both started noticing like a lot of winking and like a lot with my nose. I would move my nose a lot, and my fingers. So those were my first tics. Like I would do a lot with my fingers and a lot with my face. And they brought me to, my regular doctor who recommended a specialist. And they didn't even, at that time, they said, it could be Tourette's, could just be tics, and chronic tics, because they don't, it's one of those things that can be harder to diagnose, and everyone has it to different degrees. Some people's Tourette's is a lot more mild.
Yeah.
And mine is, I think it's on the milder side, but it's also one of those things that's like cyclical in a way. So I'll have weeks where I'm really bad, and then weeks that it's hardly noticeable. And and it seemed to, like, whenever my parents would bring me to the doctors to be diagnosed or whatever, it would always be in a day where I was doing pretty well. So it was hard for the doctor to even notice, And
I remember that too. It kind of goes into hiding, and you don't want to be performative with it and kind of like replicate what it would be like on a normal day, because that feels weird. And it's the same thing. It's hard to observe when you're supposed to observe it.
Yeah. And so it was not until later in life when I knew it was Tourette's, like 100%, just because the more research I did about, what Tourette's is versus because Tourette's, it really involves like, tics, but usually it's multiple tics, and usually there's a vocal element. And so I didn't have many vocal tics until later in life, when I started sniffing all the time and throat clearing, and the other tics morphed into more serious tics. And I have some like where I constantly grind my teeth into my cheek, and it'll be like, bleeding. It'll be to the point where it's bleeding and I still can't stop,
I have that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just, and I know like stress can be a thing that can trigger your tics to be worse. And I have a hard time like figuring that one out, because when I feel really stressed, sometimes my tics aren't that bad. And then sometimes they'll be really bad on days that I don't actually feel that stressed out. So I know that stress must play a role in them in some way, but it's hard to tell just how much it does affect my tics.
Yeah, and it's easy to psych yourself out too, because I've played, I guess, mind games like that all day with myself of, why today of all days? Like, there's not much going on. Is it because I'm stimulated less, or where is it coming from? And it's sort of this. There's so much mystery to it that sometimes I just forget about it and move on and just kind of let it be what it is. But stress and anxiety, which can go hand in hand with stress, depression. I mean, ADHD, when I'm stimulated by something I'm doing, sometimes the tics go away. Sometimes they really perk up, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of rhyme or reason. There's some general, I guess, quote unquote rules, but there are exceptions all over the place. And it's really hard to figure out. So, I mean, what did you find? So going through medications and things that didn't help from kind of a clinical side, Was art was that the first thing you found where you mentioned your mom noticing that your tics kind of took a holiday when you would get into art? Was that?
Yeah, when I was drawing.
Yeah.
And I think you're onto something when you say, sometimes when you're less stimulated, they would be worse.
Yeah.
That's how I find it. So like if I'm just sitting there watching TV, they seem to be really bad because I'm just kind of doing nothing and it's mindless. But then when I'm, so like when I draw, I always have like a podcast on or YouTube on or something, and then I'm drawing. So I've got like something that's occupying my brain that I'm listening to, but I'm also drawing. So my mind is like stimulated in multiple ways. And I think that that might be the reason that my tics subside.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a total key for me too, because I definitely have really bad ADHD, and it's always been a thing with me. And often people think, so I have my task in front of me, like the main task that I'm trying to do, whether it's something at the day job or whatever. I always have other things around me that are also turned on, like just like you said, with a podcast or a YouTube video or just something that part of my brain is going to interact with. And that is really satisfying to me. On the outside, it looks like I'm not paying attention or not listening to, or not really dealing with the task at hand, like I'm distracting myself. But it's really the only way I can kind of get in the zone and focus, by having all these things at once. And if I'm like typing something while I'm talking to somebody else, on the outside, I understand how that could look like I'm not paying attention to the person talking. But in a way, it kind of helps me in the weirdest way, which, I guess on the outside doesn't sound like it makes a lot of sense, but it works for me.
No, I totally agree. I have, I bring my iPad with me wherever I go. And so a lot of times when I'm feeling like anxious, I'll get my Apple Pencil out and I'll start drawing on it. And even like you said, I might be engaged in something with somebody else, and maybe they think I'm being rude, but I'll just tell them straight up, like, this just helps me, like, and I'm actually concentrating. It helps me concentrate, if anything. And so I try not to do it a lot, but if I'm having a really bad day, like I don't mind doing that to calm myself, even if it does seem a little bit strange to other people.
Yeah. Yeah. So who were you mentioned your mom, who were the figures in your life who impacted you with regard to the, I guess, development of TS as a thing in your life, and where you kind of found a way to level it or deal with it, positively or negatively? I mean, what kind of support did you have?
My parents were always so supportive. Like, I mean, I'm sure that they wish they could have just taken the Tourette's away from me, so I didn't have to even deal with it, because like you said, it's not easy, and kids at school could be mean, like copying, like I'm doing like winks and stuff with my face that I can't control. And so they're like copying it, and they think it's funny. And even today, like if I go out in public, sometimes I'll catch like a 2-year-old copying me, like, and every time that happens, it's like a traumatic experience, which brings me back to like kids at school doing it. And they're just 2; they don't know any better. They're just copying what you're doing with your face, right? But to answer your question, I think my parents have always been so supportive, and making sure that they brought me to the doctor and tried to figure out what was going on, didn't ignore it, and very early on, as soon as they noticed that it was happening, they didn't like wait around and see if it was going to get better on its own. It was like immediate,
What about, so, we mentioned the other things that kind of orbit TS, anxiety, ADHD, depression, things like that. Are there other companions or extra roommates in your head that are kind of like that?
Yeah, I've always dealt with depression. And I got into drug use, unfortunately, and substance abuse because of that, self-medicating.
Yeah.
And the most unfortunate part of the self-medication was the fact that it actually helped my tics. And so when I had to like get off of that stuff and get clean, like to have my tics all of a sudden get really bad again was hard to know, like, what I was using was so bad for me, and it was just a terrible part of my life. But the fact that they helped my tics was a hard pill to swallow, to realize I'm going to have to start dealing with these again now that I'm not using these substances. And so, depression, but I think you're right. I think a lot of people with Tourette's often deal with multiple diagnoses, whether it's depression or anxiety or ADD or whatever, you know.
We can steer away from this if you want to, but how are things going lately with, I hear from a lot of people through the podcast that send me emails or Instagram messages about what's happening in the world right now and the pandemic, and how it's especially the listeners who deal with OCD. And I guess I'll drop a trigger warning in here for anybody to skip ahead if they want to. But how are you doing with this stuff? It's been so weird and surreal to me that it's almost kind of been only that. I've been paying attention and taking it seriously, but it's become such a big, overwhelming thing to me that it's almost something that's happening in outer space. And that's sort of a blessing and a curse at the same time, because I don't want the reality to kind of like slap me. But, we all have our personal lives and things that we're trying to deal with on a daily basis anyway. In the best of times, things can be tough. But I mean, with this, has this affected you in that way?
Thankfully, my day-to-day life hasn't changed much because I'm an artist. I work from home. And so nothing there has been that affected. I mean, I'm selling less art right now because people are not going to buy, a lot more people are not going to buy art during a time when, their income might be affected. They're worrying about loss of job. And so my day-to-day life hasn't changed. Of course, the constant bombardment of bad news can get to people. And so I'm really cautious about how much news I watch. I want to be up to date, and I don't want to be ignorant, but at the same time, I feel like just reading, it's a temptation to just constantly read the news and watch the news and I think that's just detrimental to my mental health. And so I avoid that. But yeah, it's a hard situation. I mean, it seems like it's going to affect almost everyone in the world in some way,
Yeah. Yeah. Working from home, which is what I've been doing. I mean, technically, pretty much everything I can do that doesn't require me going out to the field, taking a portrait of somebody, or technically I can do all of my work from home. Just technologically. But it has been weird to kind of just be here and kind of be in my house. And it's hard to kind of, so I have my 9-to-5 day job. It's hard to turn it off. I'm here. There's not a hard barrier. I don't see people around me packing up and getting ready to go. I feel like I'm just kind of always working, and I don't know if I'm doing it to really kind of fill my head and occupy things. I have various theories about that with regard to me, but I've also been horrible at taking breaks, and I need to do that a lot more with, taking a break from everything. I mean, not just work, but kind of tuning out from the world and spending time with myself, or hanging out with my pets, or just something, and not feeling weird or lazy about it. Because I've always had this issue with, I guess, kind of being idle, because there's always work I want to do. There's always something in front of me or in my mind that I want to create or get done, and that affects my sleep. I've always kind of been that way.
It's funny because when I first thought about working from home and doing art from home, I was worried about not being motivated enough to actually get up and do it. And now it's almost the opposite, where I feel like I'm always working, and just like you're saying, where I need to take a break. I need to stop. And I'm working 7 days a week, and it would be nice just to take a day off. And at the same time, my work, which is drawing, helps my Tourette. So I do like to make at least an hour every day to draw, just because it's a break from my tics for a little while. So it's just a challenge. But like I said, my life hasn't, and my wife is still, she works in a hotel, and the non-essential businesses in this area have been basically mandated to shut for a little while. But she's still able to work. So thankfully, some of the people at her job have been laid off, but she's on salary, and they're keeping the people there that are on salary. So we're really grateful that we haven't been as affected as so many other people.
You mentioned commissions, and I guess a frequent thing I see in your portfolio and on Instagram are portraits. Celebrities like Anthony Bourdain, rest in peace, Tommy Lee Jones, Mick Jones from The Clash. That's one of my favorites. Nick Cave, I think I saw, Fela Kuti. why do these people connect with you? These aren't commissions, are they? Or these are just ones you're kind of doing yourself?
Some of them are commissioned, some of them are personal. I love to draw portraits of people that I enjoy, like Anthony Bourdain or Bill Murray. But I do get commissioned. Like I was commissioned last year to do Tyler, the Creator, who's a rapper. Yeah. I did his a limited edition album cover for his album, which was a really cool project. So I do get commissioned. Yeah. So some of them are commissioned, some of them are not. But the ones that I do that are not commissioned are always people that I love. I'm not going to just draw people that I'm not into myself. And so it's kind of a way of sharing some of me as a person with people. They can see the type of other celebrities that influenced me, and they're not artists. Usually they're musicians or TV personalities or whatever. But I've always loved, and my work isn't like super realistic portraits. It's pretty loose.
Yeah.
Maybe more of like a caricature in some ways, but not in a traditional caricature sense, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Not the kind you get at the mall.
No, it's more, I'm hoping it's a little bit more like fine art than that, but
oh yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with those.
Yeah. Because even though there is a sense of unreality to it, I mean, it's not a realistic portrait, but there's also no mistaking who you're looking at if you know who you're looking at. I didn't see the Nick Cave one labeled as Nick Cave, but it's just the features were perfect. And it was him at a very certain time, with the mustache. And I was like, oh, that's Nick Cave. I love this. And then seeing Mick Jones from The Clash, I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know who this is. And I look at the caption and see, it's Mick Jones.
Yeah. My wife is my critic. I always, when I'm done a portrait, I show her and I don't tell her who it is. If she doesn't know who it is, then I have to go back and keep working at it because it's not good enough. So
yeah,
I try to put it through that filter, like before I put it out in the world, like make sure that people can recognize it without knowing who it is,
Yeah. And some of these, so you mentioned just people who are just kind of people you love on a personal level, like thinking about people like Anthony Bourdain, I mean, kind of hard not to, he's the warmth that he kind of brings in, kind of appreciation for different parts of the world and people in general. And, I definitely miss him thinking about it. He wasn't a friend. I don't know him, but I miss that level of warmth and what he was able to produce. People like Nick Cave, I guess as far as a creator goes, there's always like a darkness to it, but there's a compassion to it as well. Like Mick Jones too, like he had a successful career. The Clash is obviously Big Audio Dynamite was, they had a thing in the 90s and 80s and 90s. There's some like, I'm trying to like draw some kind of common thread between the people that you link with because they're not necessarily mainstream people or household names. Tommy Lee Jones, yeah, he's really famous. I saw a portrait you did of him, but there's this level of like preciousness, I guess, to all of them. Like, is there something like that you're thinking about when you engage? Because it's kind of an intimate thing, drawing somebody and getting their details right. And
yeah, I guess I've always just had an eclectic taste in music and TV and whatnot. So it's like these people, like you're saying, maybe they're not the most famous people, some of them, but to me, they are because they're just some of my favorite musicians or like Nick Cave is probably one of my favorite musicians of all time. Maybe he's not the most known musician, but I guess I to try to like put like you're saying, you're trying to connect these people with a thread. Like what is the line? The only thing I can think is that they're just people that have inspired me, but they must have some other thread that connects them in some way.
There's like it's like a ruggedness to them that, or a rough edge that kind of fits your style of art. I feel, I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, that's true too. I tend to try to pick people that I know will fit my style of art. And so, for instance, I get people that request commissions from me a lot, and I turned down some. So someone asked me to do a portrait of their 2-year-old daughter, and I said, no, there's no way my art style is going to fit that well.
Right.
They send me a photograph of her in like a little dress, and if you see my art style, it just some people just don't work well in it. And I've tried to do portraits for people. Someone sent me one of their wife in like a wedding dress, and it just it was just so hard to do it justice. And so I ended up just giving them their deposit back and saying like, you probably should hire an artist that specializes in, because I can do a portrait of your wife, but it's not going to make her look pretty, which is probably what she's going to want. And so I'm selective, definitely, with the type of portraits and commissions I take, and only doing people that I think that I can do them justice, I guess.
We'll be right back. The Tourette Association of America is the premier nonprofit working to raise awareness, advance research, and provide ongoing support to those with Tourette Syndrome or tic disorder. With a network of over 130 chapters, support groups, and centers of excellence, the TAA engages with communities across the nation in an effort to provide tools, webinars, workshops, and support for all seeking assistance. As a primary sponsor of Tourette's podcast, the TAA supports the authentic conversations showcasing the diverse representation of the TS community. To learn more, visit tourette.org, TOURETTE.org. What did it feel like when you, because what you said earlier, when you were talking about jobs that you hated and just kind of going through the thought process of, like maybe I can get a go at something I do like and see if I can actually live off of it. And I know you're not thinking about riches at that point. You're just thinking about, sustaining yourself and doing something that you love. There's a lot of, I've thought about that forever. And incidentally, I guess the day job that I have, I get to do that kind of thing. It's, I'm not working for myself, but the people who pay me to do something I really enjoy doing, which is multimedia work and, podcasting and photography and videography and writing. Like, these are expressions I really love. And I feel fortunate in that regard because I had a lot of anxiety thinking about making a go of it on my own. And I think about health insurance, and I think about all these ways to kind of like close doors on myself and say no. So I would protect myself and not feel that failure or an empty bank account or whatever it is. What kind of thought process did you go through to try to push your talent through to where you felt like you could actually do something with it and live off of it? I mean, that couldn't be an easy decision.
No, it wasn't. My wife went to school. I was working, doing like cooking, and I worked doing some carpentry work. And so while she was in school and working part-time. And so when I went back to school for art, she was pretty settled into her career at that point. And that made it easier to know that, we did have a steady source of income. So it gave me an opportunity to try it out and see how it worked. I didn't need to make like a lot of money right off the bat. I could give myself, a year or so to really make it work. But I will say the thing that made me nervous the most is just the fact that because drawing has been really the only thing that's helped my tics and my Tourette's, I was worried that doing it for work would add like this level of stress to it that maybe now it wouldn't help my tics, and then now I have nothing that helps. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I absolutely know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe drawing was only helping my tics because I was doing it as a hobby and it was just fun. But now if I'm adding a layer where I have to make money doing it, it adds so much stress that it just cancels out what the help that it's giving me, I guess.
Yeah. Like it kind of spoils the sense of escape because it's an obligation at that point.
Right. And thankfully it hasn't been like that. But it's also probably not been like that because I've been selective and I only take jobs that I really want to do and I'm excited about now.
Yeah.
And because I've managed to, I'm so thankful that I've managed to build a following that has enabled me to do that, because a lot of artists, unfortunately, they're in a position where they have to take any job that they can get.
Yeah.
Because it's a hard career to have. And I was like that in the beginning. Every artist is. And I thankfully got to the point now where I can turn down work here and there if it's a job that I don't want to do. And that helps me keep my sanity and helps me keep my anxiety levels down a bit,
That's an amazing position to be in, because that's absolutely true that a lot of artists really have to diversify to be able to sustain and do the thing that they really wanted to do to begin with. A lot of photographers and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but a lot of photographers are also having to be videographers and They have to learn audio skills and things like that to kind of become, like, I had to become a multimedia person. I was a journalist before, but even in that field, you couldn't just be a newspaper writer. You had to, newsrooms were laying off photographers. You had to take on that skill, and the nature of news delivery was changing with the internet and YouTube and quick blast videos. And there's so much experimentation, but there's a lot of pressure to really kind of get in that game and learn it, or else you're not going to survive. And it's a really, really enviable position to be in, to be able to kind of call your shots and select your work and be able to sell things that you create for pleasure as well, out of personal interest. And I wanted to get into this just for anybody who's kind of sitting on the fence, because there's so much talent in the TS community. It seems like a very bright part of the graph in what stands out about people with TS. What's a commonality? There's always some sort of creative proclivity, and there are people who I think would do an amazing job supporting themselves that way, especially with people who have difficult times being in office environments, or just being in a stressful position where you have to kind of appeal and maybe temper yourself or your tics or how you come off, and being maybe in a studio environment where you control the creation of it and the production is something that could work for a lot of people. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's something that I know a lot of people listening are thinking about for themselves or have thought about, and they end up being really inspirational to the other people who need to hear these kinds of stories.
Yeah, it's a great point. And there's a lot of people that have Tourette's that you don't even know have it. And that was a decision I made too, where, I could easily just do my art and nobody would ever know that I had Tourette's, because I'm just putting, pictures out on Instagram.
Yeah.
But I decided, it's okay to let people know that I have it, and maybe that it could help other people that have it to see, like, oh, I can do what I want to do. I can be successful. And I'm okay talking about it. I have my, and I have my own podcast. We talk it's not about Tourette's, it's about art. And we talk about, the business of art. And so
plug it too.
Oh yeah. It's just called Thumbnail. So if you're an artist and you are interested in learning about, art marketing and anything to do with the world of art, we talk about inspiration and having an artistic style, all sorts of different topics. And I've made the conscious decision on that podcast to I try to edit out my tics. And so today I'm actually really doing well. They're not bad. Last week they were really bad. And so editing became a lot harder for the podcast, because I do my best to make sure that they take them out.
Yeah.
Which is funny because, I don't know why I do it. I think probably because it's in my mind, like if I was listening to a podcast and there was a lot of sniffing, if I didn't, because we don't, with your podcast, it's different, right? Because this is a Tourette's podcast. People are expecting it.
Yeah. The context is there. And, some people were writing in the first couple seasons asking why they never heard me tic. And incidentally, it was because a lot of the software I was using and the noise reduction stuff, and I would kind of lean off mic a little bit. And so it would just kind of get worked out that way. But if there is something that kind of gets through, the context is there to where it doesn't matter. I used to work in radio, and I had to edit out any tic because it wouldn't make any sense contextually. It would just be like, what? And maybe that's a brilliant way of like creating awareness and having people ask questions, but it's also kind of a weird, that didn't feel like the way to go. But I totally understand the editing piece of it, because in one sense it's your life. You can call all your own shots with that. There's no, I would never expect anybody to be completely out front and open and honest about their TS as much raw talk as I give. It's your business, and it's your art and it's your creation.
And if you really, really concentrate, like you can not tic for maybe, 20 seconds, even during times that are bad. Like if you're totally focused, it takes almost everything you have in you to do it though. So that's why you can't do it all the time.
Yeah.
I've become really good at controlling the vocal ones more. And so like I noticed I did like a YouTube live last week, and a drawing lesson. And I got finished the YouTube live and I thought to myself, man, I did really good. I don't think I had any tics. And I watched it back and my eyes were constantly ticking. But it's because I was so focused on the audio tics and making sure I was not clearing my throat and sniffing a lot.
Yeah.
That I wasn't really focused on my eyes. And I know I said when I draw, I don't tick. And then I'm saying like on my YouTube live, I was ticking, but the YouTube live was only partially drawing. I was also talking a lot. So that's why my tics were constantly going. So I think I make more of an effort to suppress the audio tics as much as possible, especially when I'm in public or when I'm watching TV with my wife, just because it's like, I can't even imagine. It must be frustrating for her if we're just watching a show and she's constantly hearing that.
Yeah.
So and she's always really good about it, but I'm always self-conscious, and like, I think the visual ones are less annoying to other people. And I know like we shouldn't even worry if it's annoying to other people. That's their problem.
Yeah.
And it's not anything we can help, but it's just something that, we can't, as human beings, we can't help being self-conscious about things like that.
I definitely am. I've, and I feel like I need to do some recovery for like past things I've said on the podcast about that kind of thing, about, if it's other people's problems, if they have a problem with it. But at the same time, I definitely, I think, empathize with the circumstance. If I'm in a meeting at work or something, and someone's giving a presentation that they've worked really hard on, I definitely don't want to, I don't want to limit myself and who I am in these involuntary factors. And, I do want people to kind of accept what I have and what I do, but I definitely feel that self-consciousness, and I don't want to detract from other people. And, even though that shouldn't matter, just like you said, like, everybody should be okay with it. I definitely still, I don't know if struggle is the right word, but I definitely still apply that, where I do feel situations where it feels essential to me to kind of quiet myself up or bottle up for a minute. And it's true, like you can hold it back for a little bit, but it's definitely like there's like a monster on the other side of the door and you're like leaning your shoulder into it, and you can only do it for so long before it breaks it down, or it's going to find a side door in and other tics are going to come out or something. Sometimes the longer you wait, the worse it gets. But I definitely still do that.
No, I think it's hard to get to that place, and you may never get there fully. It's just the self-conscious aspect of it is just hard to let go of, and it is strange. Like, and that there probably are people out there that they're very ignorant about Tourette's. They don't know anything about it, and they maybe think like, why don't you just don't do it? Like, because there's just not a lot of good information about Tourette's out there, and the fact that we actually can control it for 20 seconds or something at a time maybe makes them think like, well, why don't you just do that all the time? But it's just, unless you have it, you can't maybe understand, like, that's just not possible to do all the time, because it would be the most miserable existence if you were trying to focus on not doing it constantly.
Yeah.
I couldn't even imagine. I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, have you had to hit a point of self-acceptance, deciding whether to kind of live, I guess, without that being an outward part of your life, or accepting it to a degree to where you can kind of negotiate it with it being a part of what people notice about you and what people ask about you? I guess, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I when I was younger, I was always hoped like they would go away, because the doctors did say, some people have tics when they're younger and they grow out of it, and it's not something that persists into adulthood. Yeah. And I remember thinking too, like, when I was younger, like, I don't ever really see that many old people with Tourette's or tics, especially elderly people.
Yeah.
Which actually scared me a little. Like, is it because they go away, or is it because people with Tourette's just don't live that long?
I've heard that question before. Yeah. And I don't know if it's like, so, there are generational things too, when sort of access to a TS diagnosis to where you could be aware to the point where, like, okay, this might be what this is. Let me see what the neurologist thinks. Or there's so much more awareness now and so much more conversation now. And thinking 10 years ago, how that was sort of like exponentially negative. And then 10 years before that, and then when you and I were born, I was born in 1980, it was definitely not something that people had at least just heard of. It was something like, I've never heard of it. What's that? And then going back to the really old guard of, because it's not like it's something that just kind of like popped in people's brains back in the 1940s or 50s. So yeah, I've always thought about that, about people who maybe just didn't get a diagnosis or didn't have the awareness of something that this might be, even though obviously there are a lot of people who have it so heavily in their lives and have maybe more quote unquote severe forms of TS to where something was going on that they had to figure out, but it may not have been caught as TS to where there's a sense of community where they feel okay about being open about it. Or I'm just kind of riffing, but
well, it definitely seems like things are so much better now. I know that there's I was just watching a TV show that's actually was about people with Tourette's and children with Tourette's. Mm-hmm. And it's like a documentary type show. I can't remember the name of it, but the one of the teenage kids was going to like meet these other people with Tourette's, and it's like a support group. And I was just thinking, like, I grew up, in the late 80s, early 90s, and I never knew anybody else with Tourette's. I never knew anybody else that really had tics. And I would have loved to have known other people that had it, to be able to talk with them and what their experiences were. Just to have that would have been so comforting and so therapeutic. And so the fact that those things exist nowadays, and that people can, meet with other people that have it. And because of the internet, now you can have like online groups and things like that, or podcasts, things that we didn't have when we were younger. We didn't have this type of thing. And so it's so nice to be able to see other people that have it and know you're not alone,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I was going through the exercise of like starting the podcast and researching what kind of, if I put this effort into it, what's the size of the audience that might be listening? And this is like 3 years ago, I still didn't even really know. And going online and seeing the number of people who put it straight up in their bio on Instagram or Twitter, or there's so many people that you can connect with, and they're all over the world, even in parts of the world where you don't even really, that just seems so distant that they're definitely not a part of your, sometimes we just kind of think of what we culturally connect with. And definitely a part of this podcast is I want to go way beyond that. And I really hate it that I'm not bilingual, or, English is the only language I'm really barely good at. And I want to connect more and more with people in different parts of the world, just to kind of, it's what you were saying earlier about being an artist and, kind of having that as part of your narrative to where people who may need to hear that, to kind of be inspired or have a direction. It's like when there's a news story that says, like first woman to occupy this role, or first African American, or whatever it is, you always see people in the comments saying like, who cares if it's a woman, or who cares if this person's African American? It's like people need to, there are people out there who may need to see themselves in this leadership role, or in a role of something that they want to do with their lives. And if you just repeatedly see the same old thing that doesn't look like you, doesn't act like you, doesn't have the same sort of cultural touch points, it's really difficult to be inspired. And I just think it's really important what you're doing and how you're talking about it and the decisions you've made, because it even helps me thinking about it. We're the same age, and I'm doing things I want to do, but I still have this timidness about it as well. And just kind of hearing your command with it is really inspirational to me.
That's such a great point. And what you're saying is funny, because I'm a really big fan of the show Survivor. It's like one of my favorite shows. It's kind of like maybe a guilty pleasure, but I love it. But I've always thought like, I'd love to go on that show and try it out. It'd be fun to see if I could last. But I'm like, I don't think I'd ever do it. I would never want to be on camera and all people would see my tics.
Yeah.
And then a couple seasons ago,
Wendy.
last year, they had a girl with Tourette's on, and I was just to see someone else do it that had Tourette's made me think, oh, I could do it, and people wouldn't care at all. Like it was just so cool to see.
Yeah. Shout out to Wendy Diaz. She's become a friend. She's actually, if you look at her Instagram, she is amazingly talented with art and just creative pursuits. And she had some really cool things to say on there. If there were some segments, where they would interview the contestants, and she was talking about the sense of, I guess, community and style of communication that other people on the show had, and how she had a hard time kind of relating to it. Because she's always, I guess, been kind of had this Tourette influenced, maybe introversion is maybe the wrong word, but this kind of connection or a disconnect you can sometimes feel with people around you because of your self-consciousness and because of how you want to compose yourself or come off. And one of the things she said was it's something like the way these people interact with each other is a way that I would never. And it really, really resonated with me. And I thought it was really cool to see her on there, see the fan base that she developed just by talking openly about it and being a fun person to see on TV.
Yeah, it was just incredible. And of course, she probably had no choice but to talk about it openly, just because there's no way that they could edit it out of the show. I mean, I remember there was like a challenge to get back into the game, and she did really well in the challenge, but you could see during the part where she had to like concentrate and try to get this ball up this maze thing, and like the ticks she was having really bad ticks during that part, and there's no way they could edit it out. And in fact, what a shame if they did edit it out, because it's so inspirational to see someone like she did really well. She almost won that challenge, in fact, and to see someone like working through what most people would consider to be like a disability, right? And just saying like, well, yeah, maybe it is a disadvantage in some ways, but I'm not going to let that affect me, and I'm going to do just as well as everyone else. It was really cool to see.
So what haven't I asked about? We've been going for a pretty solid hour now, and I don't want to consume your whole day, but I definitely don't want to miss anything that you might feel like is a significant piece of this.
I wish I had a better memory of exactly how I felt when I found out, and maybe it was like kind of I found out in stages, because it's not like I went to the doctor and they said, oh, you have Tourette's, you're going to have that for the rest of your life. It was like, oh, you have tics, they might go away. So, I was hopeful at that point. And then it kind of got broken to me later, like, oh, they're clearly not going away. And unfortunately, they got worse over time, and that happens sometimes too, where you might have Tourette's and you have a tic, and then all of a sudden you develop a new tic, and now you've got two tics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I have tics now that I never had when I was a kid, and I have some tics that I had when I was a kid that I don't have now. And it's weird to see it evolve like that. It really is a weird thing. I mean, the way it evolves.
It really is.
And is that something that has happened with you? Have you noticed that an evolution of your tics, or have they been pretty solid?
Yeah. So the vocal tic that I have most prominently is one of the earliest tics I actually remember in terms of vocal tics. And it went away for a long time, but when I would have sort of memories about it, it would come back. It's like you think about tics and they kind of reappear or make these like encore cameo things, and then they just sort of like stick around. And that's been the case with this vocal tic for maybe the past year and a half. And it's been off and on for my whole life. I don't know why this vocal tic in particular is like so stand out to me. It's one of the more like, it takes me like 4 or 5 times to nail it and get it right to where I feel satisfied. And then I do it again, like a couple minutes later. The sort of like physical tics I have where I'm, moving parts of my body and everything, that's definitely evolved in weird ways. And there were definitely periods of time thinking in maybe like the middle of high school, I don't really remember it being a front and center thing for me. Maybe I was thinking about it less. Maybe it really did kind of slow down. Right. But it was definitely at these transitional points that I do remember it kind of being a thing, like changing schools or, going from middle school to high school to college, kind of at these like pivot points are where they would really kind of act out for me. And then after graduating college and sort of getting into work life, it's been pretty steady ever since then. And the dynamic is that, I just labored to cover it up so nobody saw it because I was embarrassed about it. And then that changed, just fairly recently, just a few years ago, where I decided to kind of open up and talk about it. And I mean, the podcast was the start of me doing that for myself and exploring it and learning about it. And at that point, the comfort level that I gained from learning that there is a huge community out there and a lot of people who are really openly comfortable with ticking in public and talking about it and, really serving as role models. And Brittany Wolf was one of the first people I found online who had YouTube videos, and she talked really proudly about it, but also realistically, and it just really resonated with me. So this level of comfort that I found, it's almost like it kind of like opened the doors a little bit more wide to let tics through. And it's easy to psych yourself out. I can't tell what's real and what's artificial, but I definitely have, where I had urges to tic before that I was like really trying to clamp down. Now I have just this comfort level where different kinds of tics are coming through. And some of the more difficult tics that I've had in the past, and I got to be careful with this, talking about it, but have not become a thing. And I have picked up other tics from other people since talking about it, especially Wendy from Survivor. Her sign of the cross tic, I did a video interview with her, and I was noticing that. And in the process, I started tapping my head 3 times, like the middle of my forehead. And that just became my version of it. And I've kind of kept her up to date on how that's gone with me, especially with the coronavirus stuff happening and, all the advice, don't touch your face. I immediately want to do that. And so, yeah, it's been this weird up and down dynamic. But I would say, even if I maybe do have more tics now than I did, say, 10 years ago, I feel so much more comfortable with it and supported, and it's easy to talk about. And that's something I'm getting better at too, is sort of communicating with other people what's going on if they want to ask, and finding ways to, I guess, make people feel comfortable asking me so it's not such an awkward thing. But somehow all of that affects how I tic.
Now, before you started the podcast, because now you have, you do a podcast, you talk to all sorts of people that have Tourette's and maybe doctors that deal with Tourette's. So you're really involved in this community. Before you started doing this podcast, how involved were you with other people that had it?
Like not at all. When I was a kid, my mom was back when the Tourette Association of America was called the Tourette Syndrome Association, or TSA, my mom would take me to conferences. I think for a little bit, she served as the North Carolina secretary for the chapter here. And she was very involved and wanted to be involved. Like, it was really cool to see, and stuff I didn't appreciate at the time to the level I do now. But yeah, when I was a kid, I had a pen pal who had TS. We traded baseball cards in the mail, and we kind of talked about our tics and things like that. And I would meet other people in person. Funny enough, more adults than kids when I would go to these conferences. People who were, like decades older than me. But seeing them and talking to them was really cool and really kind of grounding, and made me kind of appreciate this community. But that's also when I was a little kid, and I wasn't yet to the stage of, I got to start thinking about, how girls are going to perceive me, or, how, I don't want to like uncool myself by having this weird thing that people can make fun of. So you got to withhold material from people. And so, yeah, like from that point on, roughly when I was maybe 12 or 13, I just completely shut it off and acted like it never existed, and didn't talk to anybody, didn't, just, that was not going to be part of my life. That's what I decided, until I was just like, why am I doing that? Like, and searching for the community online. Because, also anxiety and depression were very big things for me. And I knew that there was a tie-in with it. And just finding the community where people who were okay with talking about it, and I could learn more about it too, because I didn't really know much about it. I still don't. I know about me, but I still don't know, like, I'm not a scientist or a researcher or a doctor. and trying to learn more about that. And
do you think the more like I learn about it, the more I think that the doctors don't know that much about it either?
So it's kind of back and forth with that. There are a lot of bad experiences that people have had with doctors in trying to get a diagnosis or a sense of direction. And, I get emails all the time where people are like, I know I have TS, I have motor tics and vocal tics, and, I've had them since I was a kid. Everything sounds like TS to me, but I went to the doctor and he said, because you don't swear, you don't have it. Or I don't see you ticking right now. Or like you were saying earlier, it's like, well, you look normal to me, that kind of thing.
Right.
I definitely hear from people they'll go and they'll get a second opinion and it's the same thing. There's definitely a lot of education in that community, in the doctor provider community, that needs to happen. And the doctors who do know their stuff they also acknowledge that. And I've talked with a lot of them recently, and they know that's a big deal, especially as we're talking about treatments like CBIT, like non-pharmaceutical treatments, where you need to understand how TS works to be able to administer it, and or at least have some kind of knowledge that's better than just the stereotypical knowledge. It's a really, really sensitive thing that can, I think, do damage to a lot of people when they're going to places and the person you're supposed to have all the confidence in the world in does not reciprocate and doesn't seem to know what they're talking about and doesn't refer you to somebody else who might. They just kind of shut you down.
Right.
Through the course of doing this podcast, I've met so many doctors and heard from so many doctors and researchers who really, really, really do know what they're talking about. There may not be access immediately to doctors who do have the know-how. People who live in maybe really rural settings, not to stereotype or anything like that. I just mean people who may not have this like plethora of medical options around them. So it puts the burden on them to travel, and maybe telehealth is something that holds all kinds of promise, hopefully. But yeah, it's difficult.
I think it does, because I think you're right. There's definitely doctors that specialize in this type of thing, and they know a lot. But there's so many people living in areas where it's so rural that they go to their doctor and they might be the only person that doctor's ever seen that has Tourette's. Right? And so that's such a disadvantage. But if telehealth becomes a bigger thing, then that could be so helpful to people with Tourette's to be able to visit doctors that really specialize and know so much more and can offer so much more help.
Yeah, and it's something that the research community and provider community and the patient community are kind of actively working on together. There was this summit that I went to in Minneapolis called Treating Tourette Together, where like that was the specific goal of looking at CBIT, or comprehensive behavioral intervention for tics, and how do we get this out there? And telehealth was a big thing that was brought up of, if we can't educate, every doctor out there all at once, in terms of training, telehealth could be. But there are the questions about insurance. Does insurance cover this? Do they honor this? And all kinds of things to work out with that. But it definitely holds a lot of promise, and I'm excited about that.
Yeah, me too.
This has been such a fun time talking with you. I feel like we've definitely hit some ground and talked really casually in ways that we haven't talked about before on the podcast, and it's been really easy to connect on a lot of these points. So I absolutely appreciate it.
I agree. I definitely enjoy it. I don't talk there often. I talk about my Tourette's sometimes on like YouTube or whatever, but to talk with other people that have it, it's not something that I ever really do. So it was nice to be able to talk about it with someone that maybe understands.
Yeah. It's cool that, we need to talk outwardly with people who don't have it and be interviewed by people who don't have it to kind of humanize it and get the accurate message out there. But it's also really nice to talk among ourselves, because the context is already there. We know where we are and what we're talking about. I know people are going to dig hearing this.
I hope so for sure. I hope people that are listening, especially younger ones, just know that like you can, do it. If there's something that you love doing that helps your tics and you can find a way to make it into somewhat of a career, definitely think about that, because, imagine being able to do that thing all the time, and how helpful that could be to your mental state. So I know it's helped me a ton, and I'm so grateful that I've been able to do it. And I was in a position a few years ago, or before I really started, where I thought, like, there's no way I'll be able to do it, just like maybe many of you are thinking. So just don't hold back. That's my main message, I guess. I want to make sure that especially younger people hear that.
Thanks for listening. I'll have links to Louis Rossignol in the show notes with this episode at tourettespodcast.com. Again, look him up. His name is spelled LEWISROSSIGNOL. You can Google him, check out his work, consider buying something. As I speak, he still has a few sketchbook pages left for you to buy if you want to get an original work and support the fight against hunger, as COVID-19 really impacts so many people in different ways, including financially. So I'm really happy to start season 5 this way. Again, give me some feedback in a voice memo that I can play on the show, tourettespodcast@gmail.com. Check out episode 0 of season 5, which is out now. You can support the podcast through patreon.com/tourettespodcast. We're on Instagram and Twitter as well. And don't forget the Tourette's Podcast discussion group on Facebook run by Sophia in the UK. She's one of the best people I've ever known. And if you interact with her in the discussion group, I hope you tell her thanks for how she's helped the podcast and the community. Obviously, thanks to Geeks Rising, the network that carries this podcast and has been a major warm support. Andrew Scott is the man. He and others at Geeks Rising have connected Tourette's Podcast to a lot of new people, which is big for the cause. geeksrising.com. And of course, thanks to the Tourette Association of America, online at tourette.org. They make this podcast possible. And we'll talk to you again next week. We're really excited about the next episode. Thanks for listening. This is Ben.